So absolutely, I agree with you. Dr. Hussam Abu Safia is a medical hero. He is an exemplar of what it means to uphold the Hippocratic Oath. And I just want to quickly speak around that in terms of context. Imagine being the last hope to people being subjected to genocide, and Kamal Adwan being at some point in time the last functioning hospital in the north, and continuing to work, knowing that helping those people means that you are putting a target on yours and your loved ones' backs. And this is what Dr. Sam Abu Safia did. He continued work throughout 84 days of siege, of bombardment, of sniping, of quadcopter bombing, of absolute decimation and siege of that hospital. And almost every single day put out calls to the international community for help, for aid, for oxygen tanks, for supplies, for food, the basics of food and water to keep that hospital running as the lifeline that it was. Now, throughout that time, his son was murdered by IDF forces because he refused to evacuate the hospital and because he refused to abandon his post. And then he himself was injured, and he sustained an injury to his leg with shrapnel in his leg, and he continued on, limping through his ward rounds. And all of this ultimately culminating in his abduction and his being taken hostage. And we've all seen that photo of him walking up to Israeli tanks in his white coat as a David before two Goliaths. And that, I think, is exactly what our Hippocratic Oath is about, to say that we are committed in our mission to provide humanitarian aid and to preserve life, even under the most dire circumstances, and for him, even at his own peril. And now he's being punished for that. He's being punished for his humanity and upholding his oath, for his integrity and his bravery. And he has been taken into custody, and testimonies say that he was beaten with a heavy-duty electrical cord and now taken to Theron prison camp, where we know that prisoners are subjected to torture and tortured to death. And he would not be the first healthcare worker taken hostage to be tortured to death, should it happen. And as you say, we don't know the fate of the remaining 350, I believe it's now actually 450 healthcare workers taken hostage, and how many have died in the interim and are currently still being subjected to torture. It's unthinkable.
Well, certainly, and also Professor Maynard, when one looks at what Dr. Theron has just said in terms of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia talking about, that image, that picture, and that picture obviously has gone viral right across the entire world. And again, characterizing Dr. Abu Safia as a symbol for humanity, or he symbolizes humanity in Gaza.
It does. I mean, I think it's an example where it is a picture that's gone viral around the world, and it is representing what's been happening for 14 months. There, as Dr. Theron said, there's maybe nearly 400 healthcare workers who've been abducted. We know some of them have been killed after horrific torture. The publication, which you may be familiar with, by Healthcare Workers Watch, of the killing, detention and torture of healthcare workers in Gaza, has got phenomenal detail of the methods of torture and stories of some of these poor people who've been tortured out there, and it is quite horrific reading. So I think we all fear greatly for what Dr. Hussam Abu Safia is undergoing at the moment. But of course, there are many, many hundreds like that, and it's ongoing.
Sorry, you're muted, Mr. Wadi.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, Professor Maynard. I think when we talk about Dr. Abu Safia, this is someone who paid a very huge price, a personal price, a price to himself, as Dr. Theron alluded to as well, in terms of his son, but also as far as the people that he loved, the people that he enjoyed serving, who he dedicated his life to actually serving these people, his patients, and everybody else that was associated with him in Gaza. And again, for someone like him to be held in a torture camp, once again, highlights the injustices and what a cruel world there is out there, where we've got an entire world that cannot come out and can actually speak out and demand for his release, but more importantly as well, to recognize what this man has actually achieved, what he's done, his sacrifices, and his commitment to making this world and to make Gaza a better place.
Absolutely, and there are so many examples like that, and I'm glad this is being publicized so much around the world now. But as I said earlier, let us not forget there are many, many hundreds of examples of this, and people I worked with whose families have been killed, whole families killed, and they came back to work. They came back to work in Al-Aqsa Hospital where I was working. All the doctors I worked with, many, and the nurses, many of them had no idea if their families were dead or alive because they couldn't communicate them. Their families had been displaced. They'd gone down south to Rafah. They'd stayed working in Al-Aqsa, and they couldn't contact them. So they went days without knowing what was happening to them. And so then they find out that they've been killed. We've managed to get some of the Gazan medical students out, and I'll just tell you one quick story as an example of this. One of them has come to study with us in Oxford. He's a medical student I met originally in Gaza 18 months ago. He managed to get out through Rafah before Rafah was closed. He's now got to Oxford and he's one of our students. And he was with me in a meeting recently, and he went onto Facebook and was looking at Facebook Live and saw a video of his uncle in the ER of Al-Aqsa with his dead son, i.e. Tarek's dead cousin. He was seeing it in live. And this is what they're experiencing all the time. It is unfathomable. None of us can, we're all horrified by this. I don't think any of us can truly understand the horrors these people are experiencing. And yet they are continuing to work. And Hussam Abu Safia is a wonderful example of that. His son gets killed. He gets injured. Other relatives get killed. But he will not leave. He carries on working.
In fact, you spoke about David and Goliath, and I've just got a message that reads, the photograph of Abu Safia's surrender made it only too clear who is David and who is Goliath, who is the humanitarian and who is the terrorist. And again, coming to where we are at this point in time, particularly at this point of the genocide, it's still relenting, it's still non-stop, and difficult climatic conditions at this point in time. We know it's winter in Gaza, so apart from those that are being left to die of their wounds, their illnesses, malnourishment, all of that put together, we see now a growing number of babies dying of hypothermia as well. It was actually quite a pitiful sight to see the funeral prayers of these two little babies that were wrapped in this white shroud as a funeral prayer was being recited. And again, going through this winter under canvas, intense, rainy weather, sleeping on wet floors, all of that actually put together tells us that we need to step up a gear as well, as civil society, as an entire world, that this obviously cannot continue for a lot longer. It needs to stop.
It needs to be stopped by Western governments who have the power to do so, who have the power to force this to end, and they are failing in doing so, despite the overwhelming evidence.
Yeah, I would add to that, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, has put out a call advising that there should be a global medical boycott of Israel. It is such a time because we must recognize that what is happening, as I said earlier, is an attack on healthcare, which sets a dangerous precedent for all of us. It implies that the Geneva Conventions offer no real protection. So first of all, from our side, and I believe that much of the global medical community feels the same, we agree with that call for boycott. And I would like to actually take that a step further to say that I think it is time for medical sanctions, which means that not just as individual healthcare workers or activist organizations to join a boycott, but to say this must escalate to where we involve medical associations globally, medical institutions globally, where governments become involved to implement this, which is in line with the ICJ ruling calling for sanctions. So there is that aspect of it, but also to hold the silence of the global medical communities and their institutions accountable, because silence in the face of a genocide, when the page of history is turned, it is a moral stain on all of our institutions that erodes our medical ethics and our international standards for law and order. And that, as I say, is a moral stain that cannot be washed off. We must act now to implement that call for boycott, divestment, and then ultimately sanctions.